We have some breaking news. The Maple Leafs have made a surprising signing by signing a defenseman. And this signing is very interesting and has a lot of Leafs fans very intrigued. So I want to break down the exact signing, discuss what the contract is, and also discuss how this could affect the Leafs going forward. Stay tuned for all that on this episode. But before we do, if you're a part of the 70 or so percent who aren't subscribed to the channel, it's free. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. It would mean the world to Darius and myself. Darius, we didn't expect to make this video today. The Leafs have signed a defenseman. And there's a lot to go over with this signing because he's a very interesting player. We saw him very briefly last season for a couple of games, and the Leafs decided to lock him up for 2 more years, and the extension doesn't start for a little bit here. So let's just dive right into it. You can see this here. We've extended the Toronto Maple Leafs, that is, defenseman Marshall Rifai to a 2-year extension beginning in the 2025 and 2026 season. So this is an interesting one, and a lot to go over with it. And I just want to get your initial thoughts on this, Darius. Again, wasn't expecting this today. We obviously had our video earlier today on Mitch Marner, and now the Leafs have signed a defenseman to a 2-year deal that starts in the following season.
Yeah, so I received a text and it said, "Hey, the Leafs made a signing." And I looked down and I went, "Whoa." And it wasn't Max Pacioretty or Nick Robertson. So I was a little disappointed in that way, but I think this is a surprising signing nonetheless. And we saw some of Marshall Rifai last year in the NHL, and I thought he looked pretty good. Like, he didn't look necessarily out of place, and he's been one of the best defensive defensemen for the Marlies over the last year. So I guess this is a well-earned contract extension for him, and he could find his way up the depth chart, especially with the fact that, Hakanpää hasn't been signed yet. I also saw a lot online, at the time of this signing about Hakanpää. How does this affect Hakanpää? This signing, the extension, it doesn't kick in till, 25, 26, till next year. So I don't think that has too much to do with Hakanpää, at least at this point. And we'll find out more about that in the coming week, I'm sure. But a welcome signing, I think. Again, he's a really good defensive defenseman, throws some big hits. We'll talk about his game some more. And Nick Barton has some great stuff on him. But I like the signing, and I think he can slowly maybe work his way up through the depth chart there for the Leafs. Maybe he ends up on the Leafs at some point in the future, right? If he continues to work on his game. And we don't know what's happening with Connor Timmins yet either. There is a rumor going around that they might move off of him. So pretty interesting signing.
Yeah, and it has some implications. Maybe not this. I mean, he could play himself into a spot, and we'll dive into that in a minute. But yeah, for regarding the Hakanpää stuff, because that was a question that a lot of us and a lot of Leafs fans online are thinking about. It does, because the extension doesn't kick in until the 2025-2026 season, it probably doesn't have a huge impact. That being said, if he's making a stride and trying to get to the team this year, then maybe it could affect not necessarily Hakanpää, but some of the other players like you mentioned. Again, if you want to know the exact details, it's a 2-year extension carrying a $775,000 AAV. And again, we saw Leafs signing. I got the notification. I was thinking, hey, who is this? Who could this be? Was not expecting Rifai to be the guy, but that doesn't mean that it's not an interesting signing. And if you rewind back, this is from February 18th. Remember when we saw him play in the NHL a little bit. If you keep up with the Marlies, he was doing very, very well down there. Very effective defenseman. You can see this here. I'm starting to understand why the Leafs opted to call up Marshall Rifai. And it's because he does a lot of things really, really well. And it's pretty intriguing if you're the Toronto Maple Leafs. And like you mentioned, Nick Barton dropped a very interesting article just then about the extension. He said he's obviously signed a 2-year deal, begins the season after the last year, and he's a 26-year-old defenseman. He basically goes in and breaks down the exact reason as to why he believes that the Leafs signed him. And basically goes on to say that the defenseman made his NHL debut against the Blues on February 19th and played another game with the Leafs a couple days later against the Coyotes. Didn't register a point, but actually averaged over 10 minutes of ice time through the 2 games with Toronto, which, funny enough, was similar to Nick Robertson's average of ice time, who played almost the entire year. So, Darius, when we saw him last season, again, we didn't get we had a little bit of a glimpse of what he could bring to an NHL team, and the defensive core is much different right now than it was back then when he did get called up. So he has a bit more work to do if he wants to try to make the cut. But nonetheless, he's been one of the Marlies' top defensemen throughout the last 2 seasons. Through 126 AHL games, he has 6 goals, 29 assists, while being the most relied upon defender on the AHL team. And again, he's not going to be a guy who racks up the points. He's not going to do that at the NHL level, but he's huge. He can throw his body around. And he's a very just good defensive defenseman. And he has a chance here, which we'll get into in a second, to take some spots to some of the guys that are on the fringe on the outside as well.
Yeah, it looks like he does all the small things, right? That I think the Leafs are really trying to pay attention to. And like you mentioned, I mean, the defensive core looks a lot different now. So the fact that they signed him here for the next couple of years, I think is an investment into this player. They see some things that he does well, these small things, and they want to work with him further because we have a large sample size at this point in the AHL, but he hasn't really played that much in the NHL. He didn't look that out of place, but not to the point that he could play every day in the NHL, right? He still has some work to do and some ways to go. But I like the signing. Again, I think that he does a lot of the small things that the Leafs are starting to look at. Like again, the shift from Kyle Dubas to Brad Treliving, you can see it especially in the defense. They want their defense to look much different and more like this guy, right? Like they just got Chris Tanev, obviously. Like the defense is completely rejigged. I think Simone Benoit, guys like that. So they want defensive defensemen. They want hard hitting defensemen that just make it difficult to play against, right? Like I think that's really what the Leafs are going for. And this is another guy, at least with the Marley so far in his career, that's doing exactly that. And you see clips on Twitter. If you search up his name on Twitter, you'll see clips of him just blowing guys up in the open ice in the AHL. So if that can translate to the NHL, and maybe he'll get a look this year again, injuries happen, right? And load management is a thing now in the NHL with certain players. So maybe he gets another look this year. Maybe again, they think he's higher on the depth chart than maybe any of us thought. So I'm excited to see where that goes and where he goes.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty exciting. And again, if you missed him last season, it's kind of a funny stat chart we have here, but 2 games with no points. But the biggest thing here, a couple things.
He had 1 shot.
Yeah, his 1 shot is very interesting. Plus minus of ones, we take that for what it is. But 11 minutes on ice is pretty telling, especially for a guy who only played a couple of games. Again, very, very, very small sample size. But he's 26 years old. He had 4 hits. He blocked a shot. He did some things. His expected plus minus is 0.1. But again, through 2 games, you can't really tell much. The biggest thing here is they locked up a young, controllable defenseman now in a couple of years who's very good defensively, has great advanced metrics in the AHL, is one of the best defensive defenders and defensemen, that is in the league. So there's nothing really to hate about this, especially at 775,000 AAV. But Darius, I want to get into this now. Who he's going to be competing with at camp. It says Rifai will enter Maple Leafs training camp in the next few weeks, eyeing a spot for the opening night roster. Like so many other Leafs are, whether it's defensemen or forwards, but he'll be up against Connor Timmins, Dakota Mermis, Philip Myers, all these different guys. Cade Weber's another guy thrown in the mix for one of the final defensive spots here. So there's a lot of guys he's going to be competing with, and I'm very interested to see if he can actually earn the spot. And that's why we both say, we say it on streams, we say it on videos, it's going to be a very exciting training camp. You have guys like now the newly signed defenseman. You have guys, think Nikita Grebyankin, Easton Cowan, Fraser Minton, so many guys who are competing for spots to where it's going to be some competitive hockey. And I'm really looking forward to training camp. But this makes it that much more exciting, especially now that we know he's a part of the Leafs' future one way or the other, whether that's in the AHL mainly or the NHL is yet to be seen.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of healthy competition come training camp and obviously the preseason, which I'm excited to watch, right? It's a new coach. Everyone's trying to perform for the new coach and obviously new-ish management, just a year old. So everyone here is fighting for a spot. At this point, at least on defense, I feel like everyone's fighting for the 7th and 8th spot, barring any injuries. But I think Rifai is up there definitely. I like Philip Myers a lot too, that they just signed, and he had some time with the Marlies as well. Obviously, I'm going to favor a lot of the younger guys because I think there's more upside there, like Cade Weber. I think he's higher up on the depth chart. So much to like about that. Mermis, I feel like he was just a depth signing. Maybe he'll stay with the Marlies. He's good for the younger guys, stuff like that. But yeah, I think he's a bit higher at this point than even I thought on the depth chart, which is good, right? I think that's a good thing. And I think this signing is also a sign of where the Leafs want to take their defense and the type of guys that they're looking for. And I think that's exciting because for so long, the team was not succeeding with a certain way of thinking and player, and now they're changing things up. So I think that's refreshing.
Yeah, it started with Hakanpää, and who knows if Hakanpää is going to stay in the team, but now we're going, started with Hakanpää, now we're moving on to different guys. Like in this case, Rifai, who's hopefully going to play a big part of the Maple Leafs over the next couple of years. But let us know in the comments what your thoughts are on this signing and what kind of impact you see him having going forward. See you tomorrow.